We don't have new caging data, in large part because donations are processed by postmark date, which doesn't really impact us much during a normal month because no one cares so much whether a donation comes in May versus June. But at end of year, a lot of our nonprofits say we need to accrue back those that happened with this postmark date. And then I know that when I was with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, we would potentially seek to bring up that date if we were doing well on direct marketing, and didn't need to capture current year revenues, or we would move it out if we needed to hit budget in a certain way. So that's the hanky-panky that comes in there. Also, there are a lot of extra gifts at the end of year. So we don't yet have full caging data, but did want to give folks what we have through November in summarized form. You've seen this in the monthly form, but donation quality is basically back down to where it was pre-pandemic. The COVID bubble is mostly deflated. There's still a little bit of a jump up, which is nice to see, but by and large, big average gift increases. We saw it on the month by month where things were going up 10% at a time. And that's been consistent throughout the year. By and large, in mail, people are giving larger gifts. So lower gift amount from 2021, higher average gift means that revenue was basically flat, down, I think 2 or 3%, but by and large, flat. Which if you put your hand over the bar that says 2021 here, you go, oh yeah, that the rise from 2019 to 2020 continued. We've gone up from under 300 million. This is processed in 2019 to almost 400 million 3 years later. That's a nice jump up in 3 years, but because we had the COVID bubble in the middle, it looks flat by and large. In talking with our agencies and our data providers, there was a sense that December, by and large, gifts were down a little bit, but that average gift was up across clients for this same sort of pattern in miniature for December. One thing that our digital folks noted that was interesting, and we're digging more into this, hopefully we'll have some interesting data on it soon, is because the tax incentives for giving itemized aren't there like they used to be, and because the new year happened on a weekend, they were seeing higher than average giving on January 1st and even into January 2nd. And so perhaps people who were getting in gift, getting all of the emails that we sent at end of year when they next opened their email, which might have been on Sunday or on Monday. So interesting there. We also saw higher than average giving Tuesdays, and so some of that revenue may have been pulled back out of December. Reactions, thoughts? What are other folks seeing?
Hey, Nick, this is Kerry from Mercy Ships. We can definitely see that the market level engine is slowing. It wasn't that that wasn't our experience with the major donors. Yeah. We saw major donors really step up. So we were actually up somewhat. But in general, if you just look at the market level, we pretty much followed this, except we weren't down, we were up a little bit.
That's good to hear. I know our digital folks also said that some of the folks that they saw that were up significantly, especially, it was as the result of increased investment. And so even those that are making gross revenue gains, some of that is coming out in costs as well. So glad to hear that major donors were stepping up.
I think the biggest thing that we saw throughout this year is the decline in the acquisition. Our existing donors did slow some, but they were pretty steady. It's the acquisition that just really took a hit.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen that across across channels.
Yeah.
It's not as much of a drop in things like DRTV, where it's the mechanism that you're getting to give is different, but acquisition results across a lot of different list sources and co-ops and things like that in the mail. Mail in particular, I think acquisition was tough. And then digital, it's a lot of folks are figuring out getting around the digital duopoly of Facebook/Meta and Google to try to get additional results with the Apple privacy settings from almost 2 years ago now, hampering Facebook results. Yeah, acquisition is tough, and it's something that we absolutely need to be able to solve to keep the direct marketing and nonprofit ecosystem going.
Well, as a result, I'm more working with my board to inform them or to start to enlighten them a little bit about future trends and future expectations, really, because those donors that we lost this year, if our projections had held, we lost 13,500 donors that weren't acquired. The big deal is not this year or next year. It's the 5-year value of those is what, $7.5 million or something. So, not having them to cultivate later on is going to have an impact.
Yeah.
So my only takeaway now is I need to prep the board so that they know what's going to happen rather than come screaming at me in 3 years going, what on earth is going on?
Yeah, whenever there's an acquisition hit, I don't know that this is the most apt metaphor, but the one that I use is an old mattress, where you get those graphs where your 5+ year donors are fine and your current acquisition is fine, but boy does it sag in the middle, because it's that lack of acquisition moves through the system, kind of like the opposite of a snake eating a large meal. It's that trough that goes through the system. Smart to be educating them ahead of time. Any other comments on results? Thank you, Carrie. Stephen? Okay. So want to talk a little bit about the ad market, because some interesting changes there. There have been 6 months of monthly decline in ad spending overall. Now, ad spending is almost always 1.4% of GDP plus or minus. And so there's worry about what this portends for economic news, or is this a lagging indicator? And so there are some hypotheses as to why this would be. One of which is that things are actually bad, and a kind of variant of that is, hey, there were all of these supply chain challenges that companies faced. Why would they be advertising for something that they may not be able to keep on the shelves? And so that could be a variant of it. There's discussion of how Apple blocking of cross-platform tracking has moved some ad dollars out of the digital ecosystem in particular. And then people are saying, oh, and I should mention that the link at the bottom, the Vox article on this, these are all the hypotheses that they gave, and I'll give some of mine in addition afterwards. With not a lot of venture capital money moving in right now, and with the crypto market pulling back significantly, there are significant industries that aren't advertising as much as they used to. I'm going to go out on a very thick limb and say that we're not going to see Matt Damon in a crypto ad during the Super Bowl this year, which we did last year. So that money is coming out of the system. Then they say, oh, there may be this structural change because people are buying in digital, where you can turn on or off ad buys in a minute or in an hour, and not buying, hey, I'm going to get a whole season of programming, here's my spend for the year. That the ad market is more susceptible than it ever has been to whipsawing. But my favorite is the relaxed hypothesis. And the relaxed hypothesis goes into this, here's this structural idea that more and more ad money is going into digital versus traditional. But hey, here's what the graph of sales and marketing dollars looks like. And if you looked at this graph and we replaced the title and said, this is donations growth over time, yeah, this looks pretty familiar to us. And so we can kind of on the outside looking in, go and say, hey, they're experiencing what we experienced. There was this COVID bubble for a time, and now the air is coming out of it. And hopefully there's this kind of soft landing that we can then grow back from. One of my hypotheses is I mentioned the link to the Vox article that led to it. Here's the first page going through it, ad, and then here's the second page going through it, ad. And so only when you get to the third page is there content. And so Vox asked a whole bunch of media people why the media infrastructure was failing. And you'll notice that none of those point any fingers back at the ad infrastructure, the media infrastructure. So there are some folks that seem to be milking the cash cow until it dies. You look at Meta has added ad space and upped the frequency of ads as you go through, which means that their core quote unquote product of giving a news feed and those sorts of things is diminished. And so you see people trying to monetize in the way that Vox article is, where you have to page through 2 pages of ads in order to get to it. There's also an aspect of smarter marketers going into it. You say, oh, Apple's cross-platform tracking caused this. No, it was the reaction from people who said, oh, these ads aren't working as well. I'm going to move my dollars to other areas. And that means there are more non-advertising advertising options. You can move into mail. You can move into direct response type categories, and those aren't viewed as advertising. The growing market of influencer marketing, which we're doing a webinar on in February, hint, hint, tease, tease, is growing, and that isn't necessarily considered ad dollars because you're paying an individual to promote through their individual social feed rather than paying the social network itself. There are also all of these owned ad networks that are tougher to track than there's ever been in the past. And so one thing that you saw when they took out cross-platform tracking and Facebook results started going down is everyone said, hey, we have first-party data. And so here are all of the companies that launched owned ad networks in the past 2 years. And you may say, you know, I didn't know, and there wasn't a 7-Eleven ad network. Me neither until a couple of days ago when I was looking more into this. But 7-Eleven has a lot of purchase data that they can use as first-party data to help monetize their efforts when you get into privacy regimes where third-party data is no longer allowed. And so you could see if you're a health and beauty company, advertising in Ulta's brand network may make perfect sense for you. If you're a travel company, advertising in Marriott's makes perfect sense for you. And so there's this fragmentation of the ad market to places where there's first-party data. The one thing I will note is that none of these, including the big giants, Google and Meta, have donation data. And so we have our own first-party and kind of shared through co-op first-party / second-party, third-party that we've made into quasi first-party data in these privacy regimes. We have data that fits our infrastructure. And there's the old saw about, I know that half of my advertising is wasted, I just don't know which half. If you're advertising with Google or Meta and you say, give me a lookalike audience, they don't know that there's half of America that doesn't donate right now. And there are really strong efforts available to be able to try to get them to donate. And those are conscious conversion efforts. But if you're not doing one of those conscious conversion efforts, and you had to say who, to Carrie's point about tough acquisition results, who's going to be my next best prospect, someone who donates, someone who doesn't, converting the person who donates is going to be easier. And so that's why we keep beating the drum for build your audiences outside of these ad networks and bring them in to get their scope, rather than going to Google or Meta and saying, give me people who look like these people because they have all of the data in the world, except the things that matter most to us, which is donation data. Any questions on any of that? Comments? One of the advantages of Trade Desk and those sorts of solutions that you can go into with your audience is they'll work with all of these ad networks and they'll find them where they're the cheapest. And so if Ulta is undervaluing someone versus Best Buy's network, because the person isn't a Best Buy type customer, it will do the buy through the Best Buy ad network and not the Ulta network and do all of that math that, thank goodness, I don't have to do. Could you imagine trying to do this with a slide rule? Pew Research had some interesting findings coming out of 2022. 41% of Americans this past year said they don't use cash in an average week for literally none of their purchases. And so you've heard me talk about how doing that attribution analysis, doing that match back and saying who from my digital donors were actually stimulated by my mail campaigns is vitally important, not just for the age adjustment that we've talked about in the past, but because you have so many people who say, I literally don't use cash, and some now who say they don't use cash equivalents like checks. So as you might guess, this changes by audience. Roughly 6 in 10 adults who are $100,000 or more say they don't use cash, which is up sharply. Younger people tend also not to use cash or cash equivalents. And so as we're going after major donor audiences, as we're trying to broaden our appeal to different age groups, making sure that we're facilitating credit card and Apple Pay and those sorts of transactions, vitally important. Fewer and fewer people get their news through social networks. The only big exception to that is TikTok over the past 2 years. People say they are getting regularly getting news through TikTok. Most is Twitter, although that's falling. And this is as of July, August. I'm going to go out on, again, pretty thick limb and say that Twitter will have fallen even more precipitously in 2023. One of the interesting things is one of the things that people talk about is Americans traditionally don't tie in weather events to climate. That's, I would say, starting to change, except I would say now it's changed past tense. Across parties, people say that when they're encountering a severe weather event, 71% of Americans overall said in the past 12 months, they've experienced one of these 5 forms of extreme weather: severe weather, long periods of hot weather, water shortages, wildfires, rising sea levels. Among those who encountered extreme weather, more than 8 in 10 said climate change contributed at least a little to those events. And it's across partisan lines, although you'll see Democrats are more likely to say that than Republicans. Which is to say that we may have an opportunity in the ability to customize and personalize and treat some of these efforts like emergency response, but also tie one of the challenges with emergency response is always, how do I get mission donors out of that? You may be able to say, you have seen the wildfires in your area. That's partly as a result of climate change. And people will believe that. You don't have to do that convincing going in there. So interesting to see. Good opportunity for customization and personalization. Teens are more likely to be using the internet constantly. And unless you think I'm shaking my fist at the, get off my lawn set, there was an interesting article that came out that said, what would happen if we talked about older people's screen time like we talk about younger people's screen time, which is to say that those in the 55-year-plus age group watch an average of 6 or more hours of television daily. And so it's just which sort of screen are you on? Teens are more likely to be on the internet. Older Americans are more likely to be watching television. But we all have our screens. And so there's a pitch for, we use it in our DRTV and connected TV pitches. Those people who are likely to be of donating age, you're able to reach them through television. Teens also there, but streaming video and streaming services more likely than they have been. We've talked about why giving's down and average gift is up. The aggregate income held by middle Americans and lower income Americans have gone down over the past 50 years. Upper income Americans have gone up. And so part of this is the reality of the America that we're dealing with. One thing to note is that this lower income amount of income being held by lower income Americans has gone down. At the same time, the percentage of people in that group has gone up. And so it's more people getting a smaller share of the pie. Any questions on any of that? Okay, heading into the potpourri section. Oh, I'm sorry. I do an internal version of this, and then I do an external version of this. And the external version, as you know, is half an hour. So our internal one's full hour. So I take some stuff out. But since the slide's up, we just acquired the Merkle RMG. It's now More RMG. 600 people have joined the More family since we've come here. And so those caging response management operations are now part of More. Both Merkle and More are really happy about this. It's a great landing place for More RMG, and we just really value the job those folks have done. The word of the year for 2021 was not gaslighting. I don't know why you would think that the word of the year was gaslighting. Some of our friends have been talking about it. We're kind of worried about you that you think the word of the year last year was gaslighting. We talked, about a year ago that the USPS was getting new vehicles. And there was some controversy because they weren't going all electric. The white trucks that you see are well past their sell-by date. They have a tendency to catch fire, which is not what you want for a vehicle occupied by a person, but also highly flammable paper. And so need a whole new fleet. They were going to go with traditional gas-powered engines, but now 75% of them will be electrified. So great to see that, and hopefully helping with the environmental impact there. Facebook, you've probably heard about Chat GPT and other OpenAI and other solutions that help you write. Not to be outdone, Facebook put out Galactica, an AI that's been trained on human scientific knowledge. And they warned going in that, hey, by the way, you should know that they can hallucinate and they're often confident but wrong. So what could go wrong with Facebook launching its own AI trained on scientific knowledge? Well, they could very confidently write articles about bears in space, including one that was launched aboard Sputnik 2 and is still living out there in space. They could censor information about AIDS and science on AIDS. Oh no, that's a banned content topic. They could write a research paper very confidently on eating crushed glass and how the benefits of eating crushed glass could add to the diet of poultry and fish that humans go through. Talk about how it has positive impacts on performance. The challenge beyond this is that there were also people who put together, hey, can you put together a research paper on the benefits of anti-Semitism? So Facebook pulled this down in 3 days. And when you consider some of the stuff that Facebook has left up for years, that'll give you an idea. So AI can be very confident, can write articles very confidently, not always factually. So Galactica is not going to be taking over science anytime soon. Upcoming educational events. On the 17th, we have a webinar coming up about the USPS postal promotions for this upcoming year with our experts at Production Solutions. A week after that, we have one about how connected TV can build your sustainer program. And then just announced, but didn't make it in time for the slides, we'll be doing one in February about how about influencer marketing. I teased that at the top of the program that we'd be talking about influencer marketing. And so our experts from First Degree are going to be talking more and more about that. So